We're always taught from a very early age the importance of healthy eating. We're told to cut our fat, sugar and salt intakes all the time. But as we enter an age where so much of our food is mass produced in factories, what effects did this food have on our bodies? And how do we take conscious steps to avoid them? Well, this is exactly what I'll be investigating. We already know about ultra-processed foods. The truth is, as a nation, we don't really know all that much. However, one person that's been bringing attention to this topic with his raw and unfiltered take on ultra-processed foods is YouTuber Eddie Abu.
Have and have guys, wake the up. Sickness is the business. Wake the up.
So I'm here in Tenby to see what people around here know about ultra-processed foods.
Not a lot really, just that they're not really good for you, and you're better off eating fresh foods, things that you grow yourself, things that haven't been contaminated, and fresh is best.
I like to consider myself, fairly educated, I feel like it's important to look at the labels and important to look at the ingredients, because sometimes you look at foods and, there's, why is this in my bread? It's a long string of letters and numbers and whatnot. It's not ideal.
Nothing at all, really.
Nothing, yeah?
Yeah.
Jack.
Don't know anything.
I know it's bad.
Well, not a huge amount, but I appreciate that they can cause lots of diseases, particularly cancer, etc.
Well, I honestly, to be quite honest with you, it's not that good. It's a bit to be honest. But if you ask me, I think healthy is the way to go. A healthy alternative and a better lifestyle is for me.
But to you, what do you think healthy food really means in this day and age?
Healthy food in this day and age, you don't really see it. It's quite extinct in the modern day. However, what I think it means is getting your 5 a day, a bit of meat, a bit of carbs, like the plate thing.
But what is this plate thing? A lot of what people know about healthy eating comes from this, the Eat Well Guide. Published in 2016, this guide shows what proportions of each food group the average person should use to construct their diet. However, 56% of a British person's real diet is given no consideration in this guide. Of course, we can see that crisps, chocolates, sweets, etc. are to be avoided. But many ultra-processed foods disguise themselves as nutritionally beneficial, and there's no mention of these foods anywhere on this guide. Now, to properly understand ultra-processed foods, we first need to be able to define them and identify them. And the way that I'm doing this is through the NOVA classification system. Created by researchers at the University of Sao Paulo, including Carlos Monteiro, who coined the term ultra-processed foods, the NOVA classification system splits food into 4 groups based on their level of industrial processing. Group 1, unprocessed or minimally processed foods. Group 2, processed culinary ingredients. Group 3, processed foods. And Group 4, ultra-processed foods. Now, for the sake of balance, we must also note that the NOVA system is not a classification system that's universally accepted. Scientists criticise it for being too broad, over-classifying foods as ultra-processed, and stigmatising some foods that aren't actually that bad for you. Now, I've mentioned this 4th category so many times already. Ultra-processed foods. On ultra-processed foods are ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods as ultra-processed. But how do you actually identify the foods that fall into it? Have a look at this image. This appears to make identifying UPFs super easy. The same type of food can fall into different NOVA categories depending on the brand. Luckily, there's a BBC Food article that suggests 5 general traits to identifying these UPFs. 1. A long list of ingredients, especially ingredients not found in home cooking. 2. Unrecognisable ingredients with long complex names. 3. A high fat, sugar or salt content. 4. Foods that would normally be fresh and short dated with a particularly long shelf life, with some exceptions, for example long life milk. And 5. Aggressive marketing and over the top branding. And lists of examples of these foods are so extensive that this on the screen now is only some of them. However, would knowing that these foods are actually ultra-processed actually deter anyone from picking them up off the supermarket shelves? Would you continue to buy, or would you stop buying foods labelled as ultra-processed?
Well, I reckon, everything in moderation. I reckon you can treat yourself to sweets, occasional pizza or whatever's ultra-processed, freezer foods. I reckon it's okay every now and then, but, everything in moderation. Make sure you're making sure that you're eating some natural foods as well, some just like raw, like grass-fed beefs and chicken and stuff, not just, everything in moderation.
Many people will say only in moderation when it comes to ultra-processed foods. And in fact, consuming these foods very occasionally and in small amounts is probably actually not that bad for you. But the problem is, a lot of the more unhealthy versions of these foods can be addictive and are often engineered to be eaten in large quantities. In addition, many of these foods are cheaper, more convenient and easier to cook than their unprocessed alternatives, meaning that many lower income families and people with certain disabilities are reliant on them. When discussing ultra-processed foods, something that's often talked about are vegan meat alternatives. So Cyrus, you used to be vegan. What kind of foods were you eating at the time?
I was eating lots of vegan alternatives, such as vegan burgers and vegan sausages, and I was eating a lot of carbohydrates, such as noodles and pasta.
What was your health like at the time when you were eating these foods?
I didn't notice a massive change in my health, however, I was aware that I didn't have a full balanced diet.
And so what caused you to switch back from being vegan to not being vegan?
Well, since I went vegan for the health benefits and the animal cruelty, I switched back mainly because of health reasons. I realised I didn't have a full balanced diet, and to do that I wanted more protein and I wanted more of the nutrients you get out of meat, so I decided to switch back.
Meat eaters and vegetarians are eating huge amounts of ultra-processed food throughout the diet already, and people sometimes wrongly think that all vegan food is inherently really good for you. It's not all of it. I mean, talking about striking a balance between the benefits of veganism, the benefits are that if you eat the right vegan diet, you can be incredibly healthy. Just eating the processed, ultra-processed vegan alternatives to meat that you talk about, so the vegan burgers, such as like Beyond Burgers, trying to think of like other brands as well, the plant-based chicken pieces, plant-based mince and things like that. They are quite processed, it's true. There's quite a lot of ingredients in there. Some of it is fairly natural stuff. A lot of it's herbs and spices. So sometimes when you see like a 20 ingredient list, a lot of it is actually pretty natural. And you'd have that in a healthy curry that could have a lot of ingredients. But then there are the ultra processed ingredients in there too, which is true. I mean, I run Free Burger, which is, as you know, you've been, free plant-based burgers. The ones I offer are the vegan alternatives to meats. So they are trying to emulate beef or chicken. They are highly processed. I'm not trying to tout them as being healthy. Free Burger's about trying to get people to look into animal welfare. But I always say, if people ask, "Oh, these are really healthy for me," and I'm like, "No, they're junk food." You know, these burgers are like, if you go to McDonald's and you have a chicken burger, that's junk food. But when you go like burgers, when you go bacon, you go sausages, all of these meat opposites to the vegan version. You got the vegan sausages, you got the meat sausages. Many of them are highly processed too. We all choose different types of vegan lifestyles. You know, you can forego all these highly processed foods if you want to. And I'd probably say to have a balance. People often sort of try to make vegans sound like crazy people, but it's really just quite pragmatic. We've looked at animal welfare and we go, "Oh my God, really? You're producing animals like that? I don't want to buy that." And we look at environmental benefits and health benefits, particularly if you eat a healthier version of a vegan lifestyle with probably, and I would agree, not too much of the highly processed stuff. But actually, I mean, I love the junk. I love the junk food, and I just eat tons of the highly processed stuff, and I don't feel any different. I'll be honest, I don't feel any different, don't feel any worse or better than when I ate all the same kind of stuff when I was a meat eater and a dairy eater. I've had highs and lows of energy my whole life. I get weeks where I'm just on top of the world, and I get weeks where I've got no energy. And I've been like that my entire life. And I would probably say, if anything, the last 2-3 years I've been completely vegan, my energy has been slightly more balanced. And that's despite me just eating everything.
Now, are ultra-processed foods actually as bad as everyone says they are? A study conducted by the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil has uncovered a potential correlation between the household availability of ultra-processed foods and the prevalence of obesity in the same country. I'm going to draw you over now to a chart that shows you exactly this. This chart was created by Public Health Wales and summarises the data perfectly. This chart shows that as a general trend, when the prevalence of obesity is higher, so is the household availability of ultra-processed foods. One other thing to note is the chart also shows that the UK is the worst for both the prevalence of obesity and household availability of UPFs. And if we look at Wales specifically, Wales is a nation where 60% of our adults are overweight or obese. However, if we look again at this chart, there are some outliers. Greece, Italy and France. They're way outside the regression line. They have such a low prevalence of obesity compared to other countries with a similar household availability of UPFs. What could be causing this? Well, if we look at a Mediterranean diet, they generally eat more relaxed, fresh cuisine. Academic analysis and secondary data presentation can only take you so far though. Have a look at these 4 graphs. They tell us 2 key things. First of all, the patients on the ultra-processed diets gained on average 1 kilogram over 14 days, and the patients on the unprocessed diets lost a kilogram. It also tells us that change in fat mass was plus 0.3 kilograms over the 14 days for those on the ultra-processed, and minus 0.4 kilograms for those on the unprocessed. Another commonly talked about risk of UPF consumption is cancer. A 2018 study involving almost 150,000 French adults between 2009 and 2017 identified the following through repeated 24-hour dietary records. A 10% increase in the proportion of ultra-processed foods in the adult's diet was associated with a 12% increase in the risk of overall cancer and an 11% increase in that of breast cancer. In addition, consumption of Nova Group 1 foods, that's unprocessed foods, was associated with lower risks of overall cancers and breast cancers. And this is the data after it was adjusted to take into account the other factors that may increase your risk of developing cancer. It's also important to note that these correlations only came with foods in Group 4. And of course, more studies need to be conducted on the matter, but there is the ethical question of whether or not it's right to give someone something just to test whether it causes cancer or mortality in them. Other less researched impacts should also be considered. For example, according to the British Nutrition Foundation, researchers linked high intakes of ultra-processed foods with conditions such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, irritable bowel syndrome, depression, anxiety, frailty conditions, and all-cause mortality. But what is of course yet to be understood is why these links are present and if any of these links represent cause or incidental correlation. Now we've looked at everything, we must ask ourselves one very important question. Is it worth it to try and get a whole population off ultra-processed foods? The truth is, we don't quite know for certain how detrimental these foods are to our health, but what we have seen is that consumption of ultra-processed foods is linked with an increase in weight gain, an increase in obesity, and it's also linked with a proportional increase in the risk of developing breast and overall cancers. Now, obesity, cancer, this all puts more pressure and more strain on the NHS. And therefore, for the sake of our own health and for the sake of the healthcare of everyone in the UK and beyond, I think it is important to be safe rather than sorry.